everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I want to welcome you to the Black Lives Matter Comics Reading List panel. That's part of our ongoing collaboration with the Black Caucus of the American Library Association and the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable of the American Library Association. My name is Sandra Farag, and I am born and raised New York City girl who's now the head of youth services for the Kalamazoo Public Library here in Michigan. I'm joined by amazing colleagues who are also part of the BCALA and GNCRT collaboration, and we're thrilled to be talking to you today about our Black Lives Matter comics reading list and why it's important now more than ever. This partnership list is 50 titles for all ages and audiences that have been compiled by members from BCALA and GNCRT. So we know that comic books have always been political, and they are a reflection and a barometer of our times, from the first appearance of Captain America in March 1941, punching the face of Hitler, yay to that, to recent titles of I Am Alfonso Jones and March, titles tackling police brutality, Black Lives Matter, and the life story of the late Congressman John Lewis. Comic books have been and continue to be vitally important avenues to visually tell our stories, to share our histories, and to show experience and multiple perspectives while engaging both sides of our brains. It is our hope that the list will plant a seed that will continue to grow and serve as an essential resource for educators, parents, and readers of all ages. This comics reading list highlights the history of Black experiences and demands a new future for Black people. We cannot silently stand by as Black lives continue to be senselessly taken. Education must lead to action. Now, if you're wondering where you can find this fantabulous list, we have made it accessible on the Black Caucus of ALA website, as well as the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable page of ALA's website. And I just want to do a quick screen share to show you this list, if it will let me. So I'm hoping you all can see this with this really dope art made by YA librarian at New York Public Library, Crystal Chen. And as you can see, with screen sharing, it's a little sluggish, but we've got books for every age, and we are so excited to talk with you today about them. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And now for some housekeeping, I will ask all of you that if you have questions for the group, please put them in the chat and we will get to them if time allows. And now on to my esteemed colleagues. I'm joined today with Deimosa Webber-Bey, Shira Mario, Tamala Chambers, and Tatanisha Tiki Love. And I will ask each of them to introduce themselves and share their entryway into comics. And since we're librarians, let's do intros in alphabetical order. So Deimosa, you are up first.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deimosa Webber-Bey, and I am located here in Queens, New York, which is the ancestral home of the Lenape people. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a Director of Information Services and Cultural Insight at Scholastic, Inc., the children's publisher. And my origin story in comics is my father, who is an avid comic book reader. He used to put a Batman comic book down on the table, slide it across, and tell me to read it so that we could discuss. We used to go to a specific comic book shop called Jeff's all the time. And, that was just really my entryway into science fiction, fantasy, as well as comics. And then as a teacher and a teen librarian, I just always tried to make sure I had comic book posters up on the wall and did activities and lesson plans that related to comics. And then I just wanted to mention that I'm a member of 7000 BC, which is a comic book group in northern New Mexico, and the Native Comic Book Society, which is a comic book club that I started with my students, and you can find it on Facebook.
All right. Shira, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shira Pilarski, or Shira Mario, as Sandra said. I am a children's librarian at the Northville District Library outside Detroit, Michigan. I would say my intro into comics, my origin story, if you will, was the Uncle Scrooge comics that my brother used to get, if anybody read those back in the day. But the moment I think that I realized how important comics and just graphic storytelling was to me was when I first read Mouse. I'm the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, so it was really kind of powerful and enlightening, and just kind of seeing that type of storytelling and how you are you're able to kind of change things up with comics. And I love just graphic nonfiction and graphic memoir for that reason. And before I start rambling, I will stop.
Okay, Tamala.
All right, so my name is Tamala Chambers, and I am currently the Children's Department Manager at Woodson Regional Library, one of the 3 regional libraries located on the south side of Chicago. So I work for Chicago Public Library. And my entryway into comics is through my pawpaw, so my grandfather. But it wasn't because he was a comic book reader, it was because we used to share the newspaper. So as a little girl, I would try to read the newspaper with him, and then he would give me the funnies out of the newspaper. And that started, you know, my love for comics. And it's kind of, my entryway into comics is kind of synonymous with my learning to read, if you will. So we had been doing this since I was, 4 or 5 years old. And then I really started to get into the dailies. And there are 2 of them that really, really, really resonated with me that I used to read like every single day from the time I was a little girl all through high school. And that was the Luann comics by Greg Evans and Curtis Ray Billingsley. So I really, really identified with those comic strips. Curtis is about an African-American middle-class family, and it was like kind of one of those moments where you start to see yourself reflected in it. So I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about it later, but that is my entryway into comics.
And last but not least, Tatanisha.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Tatanisha. You can call me Tiki. I'm here in Baltimore, Maryland, or the Baltimore County area of Maryland. I'm a middle school librarian. And so my entryway into comics started when I was in elementary school. Specifically, I need to share that I grew up in the military, or my father was a retired Marine, and we went to different military bases. So there was always a different magazine of Mad or Archie that I could purchase with my $2 or $3 allowance. And I would buy those and read those in elementary school. And of course, some of the things they were talking about in Mad I didn't get, but I still got Mad. And then I would read Archie comics and learn about the different things going on with Veronica and Betty and Archie and Jughead. And then as I got older, I stopped reading comics, but it was recently, I guess, probably like 6 years ago, when I started reading graphic novels and comics again. And especially during this time, I've just been enjoying them because it's just instant gratification, turning the page and seeing what's happening with those characters and the cliffhangers and, connecting with them that way in the art. And let me shut up and stop rambling. But yeah, it just continues. Yeah, that's my story.
Okay, so let's get down to our questions. What drew you to take part in this effort? And what is the origin story for this project?
I can go first then. So what drew me was I started doing a book club with my students, and we connected with Project Lit Book Club. I guess that was like 5 years ago. And one of the books that was on it was March. The whole series, John Lewis talking about his experiences with civil rights movement and everything. And having the students read that connected me and made me think about different ways that students could grasp hard to discuss issues or things that they didn't understand in the comic or illustrated format. And so that's one of the things that drew me to this, working with that.
So I am a fan of, again, I'm a fan of comics and graphic novels as an art form and as a tool for literacy. So as a parent and a former school librarian, I have firsthand knowledge of the power of graphic novels and comics as a way to reach reluctant readers. Comics are also an excellent way, as Tiki pointed out, to equip kids, help them digest difficult concepts, and also an excellent way to equip kids with visual literacy skills that are becoming more important to our to thriving in our highly visual culture. So that is what drew me to it. And again, from a personal perspective, my oldest son was very much into manga as a kid. He's a college student now, but he was very much into that. So I started, reading with him, and then he was really into graphics. So he didn't want to read anything else at first, but then I started to see, how it helped him with his reading fluency and with school. I mean, he is a fan. So of course, drawing on my personal experience and remembering how much I enjoyed it, I wanted to support him. So I started reading a lot with him.
And I will say, I also am the mother of a reluctant reader, which to my librarian heart and soul was crushed me all the time. And she always had to have those, you have to read X many books by the end of the semester. You have to read X many pages. So the way that I could trick her into reading longer books or better books was to give her graphic novels or some hybrids, like the Hugo Cabret by Selznick. So it's like 500 pages, mostly pictures. So she was like 12 years old, and then we had her assessed, and then she had a reading level of a 19-year-old. And the teachers were asking me, how did I make this jump? And I'm like, because you need to incorporate regular prose text, but also graphic novels, because it makes you use both sides of your brain, and it makes the rates of literacy go up. It's amazing. And it was like they'd never heard this ever. Okay, so what is the process for selecting books for the lists?
I'm going to take this one. And I just wanted to add on that one of the things that drew me to this, I'm a member of the Black Caucus, and we were seeing a lot of fantastic lists coming out last summer of prose texts, and we were seeing a lot of attention for.
Oh, Deimosa, you froze. All right,
Getting
well,
lost, that there were just so many rich stories and, works by different creators that could also get added to the list. So I was excited to take part. And so the process that we used for selecting them, it was a mix of, there was an initial brainstorm, just kind of as the group came together, putting together a list of everything that we could think of, that we had read about and heard about and carried in our libraries, and things that had circulated. And then we developed a criteria for inclusion on the list, kind of after we had that initial brainstorm, so that we could make sure that we had a qualitative reason for the book existing. And so that is on the document, and on the GNCRT and BCALA websites. And I'll just tell you, some of the criteria that we came up with were that it is created by a Black storyteller, which was a conversation we had about comic books and how many different people are involved in the creation process, so that there was at least, one Black storyteller involved. Empathy and respect for Black bodies, which we thought was important because, we're drawing people and stuff like that. A wide array of genres, artistic mediums, independent and non-traditional publishing, and the list goes on. And then once we had developed the criteria for inclusion, we also started to think about front list and back list. We wanted to make sure that we recognized titles that had been out for a while and also titles that were coming out and that were, kind of in the conversations at present. We wanted to make sure we had various age ranges and genres represented. And I wanted to point out that between this list and some of the other lists that we'll continue to talk about, for this one, it was kind of a large comprehensive list. And so we relied on reviews and what we had read and what we had seen circulating, what is critically acclaimed and talked about, things like that. And then you'll see as we go into our more nuanced kind of targeted list that we're going to talk about, we made sure that at least one person, if not two, on the committee had actually read the book. And then, yeah, that's, if anybody else wants to add there.
I think that was quite comprehensive. Thank you. So realizing that there are parents, caregivers, and librarians who are looking at this list, what is something you'd like to say to them to entice them to use this list as a resource for reading?
Okay. And so me, especially being a school librarian, my hope would be, number one, is just thinking about, because I see someone, Ms. Hill was talking about the fact that she's the mother of a child with Down syndrome and connecting the images with reading for the child. And so I think a lot of times school librarians especially, and also the teachers that educate the students in our classrooms, we need to connect with students' love and engage, like you mentioned, Sandra, both sides of their brain and give them a chance to see the images as well as have the text and give them a chance to connect with things that they enjoy. So the big thing for me is just choice and giving them access to those materials. Some of our students are not able to purchase those comics or go to a comic book store and get those different things, or have access at a local bookstore and get the graphic novels. So making sure that the school libraries and the classrooms where our students tend to spend a lot of time, they have access to the books, even in a virtual setting. The last thing, how can they connect with those books and those materials online? What is it that we're offering to them? So that's my big thing, access and choice.
Yeah, it's been one of the silver linings, I think, for the pandemic is the fact that we had to do so much stuff virtually. And I think we are now reaching audiences that we hadn't before as librarians, as content creators. And I see that there is more like graphic novel or comics content coming out digitally now for people to get from their home while we're all, sheltering in place or whatever your state is mandating. So I think that that was one positive thing to come out of this past year of insanity.
One thing, oh, sorry, really quickly, one thing that I would love to mention is there have been an increasing number of awards given to comics and graphic novels, and that's definitely something that I like to mention, particularly to parents who seem reluctant to allow their kids to just read comics and not take them seriously. Obviously, New Kid won the Newbery last year, but even this morning, When Stars Are Scattered, Dragon Hoops, Kent State, the Back Durf book, they all won honors and awards, and that's a trend that's going to continue, I think, moving forward.
So comics have been around for decades, and yet some people still think of them as a new medium without much substance. What do you say to those who still reject comics as a valid information source that accurately captures the worldview at that time?
So I was thinking both quantitatively and qualitatively about this, and like from the quality, perspective, I think that examples of March with John Lewis are kind of iconic for how we've really captured our history with graphic novels. And then, to tie it back further, he acknowledges that he read a graphic novel about Martin Luther King, which inspired him, as a young child to become active in the civil rights movement. And then, another two books that are, kind of tie into that same theme of, our story being told, our history being shared, is, a book, Incognito, that we have on the list, which is about Walter White, who's an individual who used to work for the NAACP, and, because he could pass, actually was present and, at lynchings or in towns after lynchings took place, and was able to bring that information, back north, about what was really happening. And so then, we can tie that to books that we have now, like I Am Alfonso Jones. Let's see if I can pull it up here for you in a second, which we talked about in our webinar earlier this year, which has to do with Black Lives Matter and police violence, and so there's, all of these examples of books, that, front list and back list, as I was saying, like books that are coming out now and books, in the past that capture people's experiences. And then for me personally, I thought that this book, Hot Comb, that we had on the list, which also got an Eisner, this, if you go through it, it's a series of short stories, and it goes through all, I went through the experience of having my hair relaxed as a young woman, and the scenes where she's dealing with the lye relaxer in her hair and the pain remind me of scenes from Smile, which some of you may be familiar with, where the dentist is pulling, on her braces. So there, those are some of the ways where, like real life experiences can be communicated. And then I just, from the academic side, I wanted to point you to Jesse Carp, who's a professor that I had at Pratt Institute, a class on comic books. He has a lot of publications that are both academic as well as a book called Graphic Novels in Your School Library. And then there's the webinar that we did with Professor John Jennings and Professor Stacey Abrams, which is a place where you can look, and we kind of go through all of this with this question in more depth. And then Professor Jennings also has a book called The Blacker the Ink, which is kind of like an academic tome, if you're in the academic libraries, for stuff like that. And then lastly, where I work at Scholastic, we have the graphics imprint, and so work with graphic novels. And we have a PDF about using graphic novels in your classroom library. And there's also some research from our Kids and Family Reading Report that really shows that kids that are, between the ages of 9 and 11, the kind of adolescent tween years, they really respond to graphic novels at the exact same time that they're starting to read prose less, and so there's ways that we can capture the kids, like people have talked about here with their own children and the experiences they've had being turned on to reading through graphic novels.
So graphic novels are slowly receiving acceptance in the classroom and elementary and secondary instruction. Why do you think the acceptance of graphic novels has been so slow?
I could talk a little bit about this. Oh yeah, I see somebody is excited about Black. I love that book. Okay, so in the 1950s, there was basically the Senate had a subcommittee hearing about juvenile delinquency, and they determined that comics were destroying children and teens. They were leading to juvenile delinquency. And comics publishers could have gone in one direction. They could have decided not to change anything, and then the United States government most likely would have started regulating them and censoring them. Instead, comics publishers decided to start something called the Comics Code Authority. If you have taken, comics classes, you might already know about this. But basically, the Comics Code Authority was a code that determined that comics couldn't have any controversial things in them. And so for decades, there weren't really a lot of people kind of taking things seriously, getting into the sort of more complicated and more big issues that people can actually relate to. So literature was improving over time, but comics were just staying as those fight 'em basic superhero stories. Not that there's not legitimacy to those stories, but it was starting in about the 80s when certain publishers decided that they didn't really care anymore about the CCA, the Comics Code Authority. Like Vertigo, for instance, started publishing these really kind of weighty books that really made you think. And because that is a relatively recent phenomenon that those books have been published, it's taken a long time for people to stop thinking about comics as just those punch, fight, bam kinds of things.
And from an educator's standpoint, I would talk about the fact that a lot of times educators rely on the curriculum that they're doing. And a lot of times the people that are creating the curriculum don't have the interest or the background with graphic novels or comics. So especially, I hate to say it, but some still have a negative perception when it comes to graphic novels and comics. They see it as, and this is the term that some people tend to use, lowbrow or not complex in text and that type of thing, which is not the case. So the other thing is the whole idea of the literary canon that people prescribe to and what they feel students should have in the classroom. And like I think Shira was mentioning the fact that, you know, with New Kid winning the Newbery last year, and of course we have books that won numerous awards this morning. So that continues to let people see that, hey, it's not, you know, what they call lowbrow, or it is complex. It does have a beginning, middle, and end. It does have that plot, character development, etc., the things that they're looking for. So just shifting that mindset and the perception that educators have so that students will have access to these books and choice to read them. I think that's something that's going to be happening.
All right, well, I figured let's throw in a fun question. And which comic book character or graphic novel character do you most identify with and why?
Okay, so I'll take this one. Having just read Nubia, real one, which is scheduled to drop next month, I believe. I really identify with her as a character. I am, of course, speaking from a place of growing up with watching Linda Carter's Wonder Woman. So I am a super Wonder Woman fan, and it was just really great to see a character in that vein who looks like me. So more importantly, I resonated with her because of this whole idea of being different and being too much, too big, too tall, too doing the most, and feeling like, you know, the need to repress parts of yourself, which is, you know, kind of sort of the themes in that, and being for the fear of being misunderstood. And then I also like really enjoyed the artwork, of course, and her big glorious hair. So fantastic. I really resonated with it. It just really warmed my heart to see.
Okay.
I'll go.
Sure.
I was just gonna say very quickly, obviously for me, I guess it's obvious to me. I love Halle Berry as Catwoman. And Storm, you know, growing up, it may seem like very basic ones to put out there, but I just, you know, always, identified that Storm was a Black superhero heroine, and that, you know, when I loved seeing Halle Berry do Catwoman, which, you know, because I was a Batman person, I was a huge fan of. And then the other thing I was just going to mention is that, you know, this one, for any of you who've had the, you know, experience of, you know, various things with hair, you will find a lot to relate to in this book, not just straightening, but also natural braids, everything. And for me, this book was the one. I feel like New Kid by Jerry Craft, you know, we mentioned it a few times, but, I had a lot of these experiences when I went to school, where, like the long commute from a kind of, underserved part of New York City to an affluent part of the city, going to school with kids who are highly privileged, and things like when they come back, the friends come back from vacation and they're all like, oh, look, I'm darker than you, and hold their arms up against the character. These are experiences that I had growing up. And so I just really felt like Jerry Craft captured my life experience with this book, and seeing it win the award just like reaffirmed that, our experiences belong in the canon as well.
And may I follow Deimosa? So for a long time I've said storm because storm, and then I read the graphic novel version of Parable of the Sower, and so the big thing for me is I really connect with Lauren because she's spiritual. She asks a lot of questions. She's close to her family and her father in particular, and then just the different things that she encounters. But I just love this graphic novel so much, and so the character and having one of the works of one of my favorite writers in the graphic novel form, yes, twins, just means so much to me. So I would say right now, this moment, Lauren.
And mine, I think relatively obviously, Magneto. As a Holocaust survivor, I certainly related to that growing up because I grandchild of Holocaust survivors, like I mentioned, and got to hear all of the stories firsthand. But really recently, I read Flamer by Mike Curato, which came out, I believe, this past fall, and I really related to Aiden, the main character in it, who is definitely queer, but doesn't know yet and thinks that he can't be queer because he's growing up with this super religious upbringing. And that sort of mirrored some of my own personal experiences. I love to see how many people in the chat loved that book too.
So we just, as I heard this morning, our superheroes list is ready to go. It's going to be put in the chat. So that's not it. Well, it's coming. Our superhero list is coming, and you're going to get a sneak peek to it because that's how we roll today. And then to piggyback off the superheroes list, I want to ask, why aren't there any books on the superheroes list about Miles Morales, Black Lightning, Storm, Blade, Cloak of Cloak and Dagger, and the Captain Marvel, Mr. Terrific, Nick Fury, and Static Shock, for some examples?
And I can talk about that really quickly. So we did talk about our criteria earlier, and not everything in the criteria has to be 100% the case, but we wanted to make sure that with superhero comics, because there's the author of the words, there's the illustrator, there's the inker, there's the penciler, there's all these different people involved. And we wanted to make sure that we had one person who was involved in the storytelling who was actually Black, and none of these particular superheroes have currently in print high quality materials that have a Black creator. So like Miles Morales, I love Miles Morales. Please, we would love if they would actually get a Black creator to publish Miles Morales stories. Publishers, if you're listening to this, get Black creators. Thank you.
All right, so another fun question. If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Teleportation. I would really, really enjoy having the ability to just appear and disappear at will. It would solve lots of traffic issues, that's for certain.
Look at you thinking about the world. I'm like, I want teleportation because I just want to visit every place for free and be able to pop in and out whenever I wanted. You thought about traffic. You're a much better human than I am.
Yeah, teleportation was also big. I did a survey at the Indigenous Comic-Con a couple of years ago, and one of the questions we asked people at our table was what they wanted, and that was hugely popular, teleportation. I think for me, I would want telekinesis, and that is just going back to my love for specifically the movie Firestarter, the book Firestarter, even before that. And then The Girl with the Silver Eyes. I can't remember the author, but that is a book I loved from childhood that I got through probably Scholastic book clubs. It's very similar to Firestarter. Yes, Willow Davis Roberts, thank you. It's such a good book if you haven't read it.
And I think when we talked about this, I said mind control, so I'm going to still stick with mind control. I would love to control a few minds and make some changes where I see that they need to occur, and that's it, mind control.
That is a very scary power. I'll let you have that one.
See, mine also is teleportation, and
Where
I think part
else?
of it.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Mine is also teleportation, and I think it's partly because I live so far away from everyone that I love. I barely know anyone around here, and I want to be able to see them. But also, think about how great it would be if you were on vacation to pop home for a second to pet your cat and then go back to your vacation. You know, I would love to do that.
Where else would you like to see this collaboration between BCALA and GNCRT go? And do you have any ideas for the future? And those of you watching us right now, if you have any suggestions for us, feel free to put those in the chat.
Ideas. Well, I'll pop in real quick before other people start to add ideas, and just note that we plan to do at least one more webinar if we can. We'll share information about that, forthcoming, and also that we are hoping to create, more lists moving forward. And we're just hoping that by, to me, like, I'm hoping that this is just going to continue to, create a place to elevate more stories, and that people will, look at our lists and use them for collection development, and not just only the lists, but also the criteria that we've got for the list. It would be my hope that that would, be something that would be useful to people who are building a collection, whether it has to do with specifically graphic novels, or I think some of these things on the list could be, applied to prose and picture books and, stuff like that, as you're trying to evaluate books to teach with or to purchase for your library collections.
I know a lot of libraries are doing diversity audits of their collections, so using our criteria would be a way for them to sort of conduct their own diversity audit without bringing in an outside person to evaluate. I'm from the school of teaching them to fish rather than giving them the fish. And then we've got anything concerning queerness and Blackness for youth and adults. I know that list is small for graphic novels that exist, but just a conversation explaining how those intersecting identities would be wonderful. It's a good suggestion. Anything else?
I can say that we do have, at least for the first half of this year, we have these mini lists that are going to drop that are subject specific. So next month, towards the end of the month, look out for our Afrofuturism list, because Black History Month is great, but let's talk about Black Future Month, right? So just keep looking at the Black Caucus and GNCRT websites and social media for updates.
Any last thoughts, questions from the audience? Anyone want to mention anything that they didn't get to share earlier?
So I'd just like to say a few more words about the Curtis comics.
Sure.
Again, during my origin story and why it resonated so much with me. So, you know, of course, Curtis was a hip hop fan, right? So I enjoy hip hop. He also was into superhero comics, which there's an interesting thread in the comic strip where he's always getting in trouble in school, right? And I just thought about it, like he's always getting in trouble at school for reading them, like reading the super captain cool, something like that. But he would be reading those in class and the teacher would always catch him and then he would always get sent to the principal's office for not, I guess, being engaged in school. So I thought that was a interesting thread there too. And then, you know, it was one of those comics that that highlighted African American culture. So, you know, it would have comics about, you know, Dr. King, honoring Dr. King, Kwanzaa. So that was really, really, really something that resonated with me then. And if you are not familiar with it, I do encourage you to check it out because it's still being published and it's still in, you know, it's in syndication. So that's all I wanted. I wanted to say a little bit more about this because that was my thing.
No, that's fantastic because I hadn't heard about that one. And I think from the audience, others hadn't. Some people had and they agree with you. So it's great that we're shining a light on some of these fantastic works for everyone to read and share. Anything else? Deimosa, you're unmuted. Did you have thoughts?
Oh, I was just going to echo what Tamala had said and point out also from the newspapers, the Boondocks, which we have on the list. This one is A Right to Be Hostile. And, you know, I just always, you know, identified with Huey kind of telling it like it was in the pages of the newspaper, you know, for me as a kid to see Aaron Magruder just analyzing, you know, as you're saying, like the newspaper, you know, you're reading the articles and then a few pages in the funnies, you get to see this, you know, just witty perspective, you know, kind of within 3 or 4 panels, analyzing what's going on, you know, was something that was incredibly, you know, meaningful to me. And I didn't follow the cartoon as much, but, you know, I just wanted to echo that with the papers because, you know, I would hope that we continue to highlight the serial comics that are out there. And on the list, we have some web comics, you know, for people to take a look at. I know that sometimes when you're setting up your library homepages and you're creating links, you know, they're often to databases and stuff like that. But those of you who have started to create pages, you know, with links, there are a lot of wonderful web comics and zines as well, which we didn't have a chance to get into. But, you know, sometimes it's hard for people to find space to get traditionally published. And so a lot of the, you know, burgeoning creators, you will be able to, you know, kind of get to through things like the internet, web comics, and zines.
Did get a question in the chat. I don't know if any of us know the answer, but do any of you know about any comic software that has been helpful to help students create their own comics? Well, I want to thank all the librarians on the panel. I want to thank all of you for joining us and spending the last 45 minutes of your life with us today. For some it's morning, some afternoon. I think this is one of the best collaborations I've ever been on. So I look forward to seeing what else we can do. And keep checking the BCALA website and the GNCRT website. Donations are welcome. Be a member, do all the things, and support Black comics. Thank you, everyone.
Wait, really quickly.
Yes.
I want to say that you don't have to be Black to be a member of the Black Caucus. I'm a member of the Black Caucus, and I am white. So give them your money and contribute to things. Thank you. Allies.
Yes. Yes, and thank you. That is good to know. Yes, we accept all co-conspirators. All right, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your ALA.
Thank you.